Okay, so let's put in our concept of this negative externality into our understanding of markets and values and costs, right? So this is going to be a negative externality. And we're going to put this into a market. Okay, so you can think about this as maybe the market for gasoline, where consumption of gasoline while driving a car produces pollution, which harms not just the people who bought and sold that gasoline, but also other people who were not part of the trade. Okay, so this includes not just people who don't drive their cars, but anyone who didn't drive that particular car. Okay, so let's put our market diagram up as we know it up to this point. And here we're going to assume that the demand curve here is going to measure private values, just as before. Okay. But also we're going to assume that this is the social value. Okay, so private values are also the social values of gasoline, right? If I drive my car to work, that's a benefit I enjoy. It's not a benefit you enjoy because you were not in my car. Okay, but on the supply side, usually we assume that these, are equal to, well, in the previous chapters, we were assuming that these were equal to the social values, but here they're just the private costs. And they're not equal to the social costs, okay? Because what we have is an additional cost that's imposed on society that sellers aren't incurring, right? So we're going to have this externality up here, which means that the social cost curve is above the private cost curve. Okay, so let's have a think about what this means for total surplus. Okay, and to do this, I'd like to go to another color, and it is not letting me. Excuse me. Okay, so in equilibrium, we're going to get the quantity at the intersection of the supply and demand curve, right? Because equilibrium is the result of buyers and sellers responding to their private incentives, right? The sellers, generally, if they're trying to maximize profit, don't really care about this social cost, right? They're trying to maximize profits, and their profit maximizing decision given a price is to pick the horizontal coordinate on that part of the supply curve. Okay, so here we have, let's divide this graph up into some areas. I'm going to draw a horizontal line here at the equilibrium price, and I'm noticing that the social cost curve and the demand curve are intersecting at this point here, so I'm going to draw a vertical line there as well before I label my areas. Okay, so here we've got areas A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Okay, so let's see if we can work out what these areas are. Okay, so we've got consumer surplus in this situation is the area between the demand curve and the price that consumers pay. So consumer surplus is going to be this area here. So if we look at the graph, excuse me, here we get consumer surplus is A plus D plus E. Okay. Now, producer surplus is going to be everything below the price that sellers receive, which again is the equilibrium price, and above the supply curve, which is their private costs, right? We've got a seller who's on this part of the supply curve. It costs this much to produce something. They sell it for this much, so they get that benefit. Okay, so producer surplus here is going to be B plus F plus C. Okay, but what about the social cost? Okay, because these are costs that society is incurring. It's just that sellers aren't incurring these costs. Okay, so the social cost of producing, say, this item, this marginal unit of gasoline, is equal to the height difference between the supply curve and the social cost curve. Okay, so just like we're measuring these areas for consumers and producers, we're going to measure social cost as the area between the social cost curve and the private cost curve, right? These are the ones that are, these are the external costs. So sorry, we should probably label this external cost, right? The costs imposed on third parties, and to the left of the equilibrium quantity, because that's the quantity being traded. It's probably going to be helpful for me to highlight this area. So let's do that. This area is this area here. So essentially all of these letters, all of these areas are costs. Okay, so this is a minus area C, D, E, F, and G. Okay, so what we have here are a whole lot of costs that aren't being included in our usual total surplus calculation. Okay, so if we think about this, it'd be helpful if I go to a different color. C was producer surplus, but it's also an external cost, so we can cancel those. D is consumer surplus, but it's also an external cost. E is consumer surplus, but it's also an external cost. And F is producer surplus, but it's also an external cost. So what we've got here is a total surplus, which is now equal to A plus B minus G. Okay, so we've produced, if we think about this, if we measure total surplus just using consumer surplus and producer surplus, and this is still good at measuring the benefits that go to consumers and the benefits that go to sellers, we're going to be measuring all of these areas here, whereas in total surplus is just going to be equal to this here. Okay, so the question from here is, well, what quantity is going to maximize total surplus? Okay, well, could we get rid of area G? Is that something that we could do? And the answer is yes, right? We could get rid of area G. Okay, and the way to get rid of area G, if we were the social planner, would be to force the market just to produce Q star. Okay, if we think about this, everything to the left of Q star, we have social cost less than social value, right? So if we produce those items, that's going to increase surplus. And to the right, social cost is greater than social value. So these are items that are harmful to society. And what we're missing out on, which in this case is a good thing, are these bits in the middle here, which are privately beneficial, right? There are buyers and sellers out there who benefit from those trades, but if you incorporate the externality into the calculation, society doesn't benefit from those trades, right? So these are, situations where pollution is beneficial. Activities that cause pollution are beneficial to people who sell it because they sell polluting items because they get money for it, and people who buy them because they enjoy them. But from society's standpoint, they're not generating so much of a benefit privately that it outweighs the external costs. Okay, so if we think about points to the left of this optimal quantity, here we've got our social values, which are going to be greater, and here they're private values as well, are going to be greater than social costs. Okay, so these trades have a positive benefit to society, whereas if we're out here, the social cost is above the social value. Okay, thank you very much. I'm James Bland. I will continue this series of videos and talk about positive externalities next. Thanks.